Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the best practices session number 3. The growing season has been moving quite fast, has been quite interesting. We have a lot of growth development, and it was the time to do a best practices session. So this time we have a very nice agenda. We'll have a AgroMart group talking, obviously Jeff Franklin introducing the weather information, myself that we'll talking about the viticulture activities, and we'll finish with a discussion with Steve Ells. And this time we are glad to have Daniel Graham, the Vineyard manager from Benjamin Bridge. So I would like to give the word to Steve Ells. Steve.
Thanks, Francisco. Welcome everyone to session number 3 already this year. We're and the season's progressing very fast. Jeff will give us a good update on that for sure. But yeah, it's well, I was joking with Francisco later, you know, we're 2.5 months from standing around watching them ripen. So it's been a busy 2 months so far, and the next 2 months will be really busy. So looking forward to it. So yeah, it's really nice tonight to have Alison Bremner and Mel Bent from Truro AgroMart. They're the Valley team. And they're going to give us a presentation today on the services they offer and what they're seeing in the vineyards here now, and a little bit on the nutrient management and how we can balance the vines and stuff. So really happy to welcome you two here to our best practices this evening.
Thank you, Steve. I'm actually going to get well, first I'll just say that Mel and I are 2 out of 4 in the Valley for the Truro AgroMart. So it's and Bent, even though he's on mat leave, we definitely still lean on her quite a bit. And then my husband, Nicholas Yearlink, is the reason that we get trucks down to the Valley. So without further ado, I'm going to let Mel take it from here, and I will just first check if you can see my screen and if you can hear me.
Yep, both are good.
Okay, so basically Mel and I are going to speak today about crop nutrition. The key here too is that we need to have a plan in place, and no longer really, especially in today's day, can you make decisions kind of by the seat of your pants. I think COVID has proven that to a greater extent, but more than ever, we do need to have a game plan, both long-term and short-term, for your vineyards. Mel, you can take it from here.
Yeah, so kind of elaborate more on our long-term and our short-term goals and planning. So really, in the fall is when our planning process starts for a lot of things. So that's usually when we're doing all our soil sampling. That way in the wintertime, that's when we're going to have time to sit down and go over for fertility recommendations. And then as we get into the winter, this is kind of our time for, if you're in the season right now and you're thinking, wow, this is kind of a product I'm looking for, but I don't necessarily have, or we didn't have, and anyways, it's kind of a specialty thing. That's kind of the time to come to us, and we might be able to try and like source that so you have it for next year. And it's really when we do a lot of our ordering for chemicals. So we're looking at what we had for last year, how much we used, and then kind of going forward thinking about how much we're going to need. So a lot of that kind of stuff is usually done up in the Truro area, but it's kind of something too, you can always take it to us and we can take it to them. And one thing is that where we are down here in the Valley, we don't actually have that place to go into the ordering and picking up chemicals and stuff like that. So getting ahead of the game for chemicals and fertilizers and planning, it's a big part of our winter process. So another one is we like to do informational sessions in the wintertime. So this is a time where we're able to line up speakers to come in, whether it's Rick DeYoung talking about Agri-K products and fertility for the upcoming year. It could be a chemical rep, kind of letting us know what new products are going to be on the horizon. And then also now too, talking about products we no longer have, and switching. And usually with these, we always try and get pesticide points for the meetings. So another thing too we like to do with growers in the wintertime is preseason meetings. So these are kind of meetings that allow us to sit down with the grower and we can either go over products that you didn't like or you did like, or talk about pests or diseases that showed up this year that we can look into for next year. And it also kind of gives us time to touch bases on whether you're looking to get some fertility recommendations, or we're going to be looking at doing some sap sampling, tissue sampling, any of those kinds of things. And then sometimes too, out of these meetings, we can develop like some orders that kind of helps both of us in the way that we can get some product out to you that you have in your chem shed that you might need for the upcoming season. That way you have it on hand for those emergencies where something always pops up, whether that's diseases or insects. And then kind of like the short term, which we can't always plan for, is some of the sap and tissue sampling. So these are ones that we like to do at key timings. And from those, we can give out recommendations based on the sample reports. So I think that's all that I have for this slide here, Allison.
Yep, and then just to piggyback off of what Mel was saying about sourcing products, especially in the winter. One key thing that we've tried to do is to try and service those specialty products that often you end up, when you order in season, you end up getting stickered with a larger bill due to basically last minute ordering coming from Ontario, a bunch of trucking fees. So we try and think of the specialty growers like organic or just people that like to use different products, I guess, and give the opportunity to tell us what you perceive that you're going to need so that we can source it and basically put those strange type orders together to try and reduce the trucking and overall try and reduce your costs. So we've had some success with that, especially with organic and soluble type orders. If we know ahead of time, we can source it and reduce our trucking drastically and make sure we have what you need. And if there's no questions on basically like what we do as a group, we are all, everybody on staff is a certified crop advisor with the, like we all have our certification. And we all pretty much have a specialty. So both of us in the Valley, we do work quite a bit, obviously with grapes, apples, and all kinds of horticulture crops, and of course field crops as well. But we also have people at our fingertips that, you know, specialize in other crops that are just in Truro. We're also closely linked to people in Ontario at other agri-marts that we do talk to quite a bit. So asking us a question isn't always just us. We do have people that that help us out daily as well. So to go a little bit onto the 5 R's. We use this 5 R's of plant nutrition. Basically, Rick DeYoung from Agri-K is a major influence of ours, and he's often talked about the 5 R's of plant nutrition. This comes up time and time again, using the right nutrients. So being able to tell what that right nutrient is, we've been able to take guesswork out of that, and we can talk about that a little bit later. This time of year, especially if people start seeing pale leaves, automatically they jump to one nutrient in particular, they think nitrogen. And I assure you that probably last 10 samples that Mel and I have taken, 8 out of 10 of those have not been nitrogen. So it's good to know exactly what that right nutrient is at the right time, looking for the windows of opportunity when you need that nutrient the most, in the right form. So knowing what type or what form of nutrient works best as a foliar, as ground applied soil, or say you're vertigating those type of products. In the right mix, making sure you're putting the right things in the tank and at the right place. And again, where are you putting it? Are you putting it on the plant? Are you putting it on the leaves, on the soil, and so on? Having some technical difficulties. Oh. So one thing that I feel that the Valley Agrimark team is very committed to is we do try and provide the right nutrients at the right time. And I think if you've worked with us, we are often more cautious than those that are the ones that are spraying. So we are looking for the right time, and lately temperature, humidity, those kind of things have to come in when you're spraying. We have been seeing damage already in some crops, people who have just applied product and it wasn't the wrong mix, it was not applied at the right time. It was 25 degrees and humidity, and we've already seen damage in some crops. So we are cautious, but I think that there's reason for it, and trying to find that right time as to what growth stage your plant is at, and during that growth stage, what are the key nutrients that it needs. Maybe Mel can talk a little bit about more than just NP and K.
Sorry, I lost you there, Allison.
I was just saying, maybe you can emphasize more than just NPK. So
Oh, yeah,
what
sorry.
else do we look at?
Yeah, so when we're looking at either sap samples or tissue samples, we are also looking at your micronutrients. So your micronutrients also play quite a large role in the scheme of things too. And actually right now we are seeing a lot more of the micronutrient deficiencies when looking at samples this season. So the importance of like mag, zinc, molybdenum, copper, manganese, and zinc, boron, they all do play a large part in either helping with photosynthesis, your proteins, and even help metabolize some nitrogen. So they're kind of the building blocks, I guess you could say, with physiology, like stuff going on in the plant for plant processes.
And we often get hung up on deficiencies. It seems to be like you automatically jump to what possibly could be missing. But I do think we also need to be cognizant of the fact that we can also have excess problems. The valley in general is often excess in phosphorus. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have lots of available phosphorus, as we are seeing many soils that are high in phosphorus, but many plants that are low in phosphorus. So trying to find those relationships, what's pushing that phosphorus down, and how can we help get access into the plant. Micronutrients are just that, they are micro. So if you use too much of a good thing, it can work very much against you. And we've seen that in many different forms on many different crops.
So yeah,
so just basically committing. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm good.
Basically just committing to selecting the correct nutrients that you need. Again, you need to know what that nutrient is, and I will talk a little bit about sap and how it can take the guesswork out of it, and how we use them basically alongside of your tissue tests to actually maximize the overall benefit of your crop. I might have just mentioned this a little bit, but with your nutrients that you have, there's synergies and there's conflicts. So we have basically nutrients that will push against each other, and two common ones, or I could even say three common ones that you hear a lot about are potassium, calcium, and magnesium. So by applying a calcium product, you have to be, I guess, aware that may actually push your magnesium and potassium levels down. and the same with potassium. And it depends on the crop that you're dealing with, and even what variety you're dealing with, as to which nutrient is more important at what time. So all three of those nutrients we know, calcium, magnesium, and potassium, all play a huge role and benefit your crop really, really well. But putting them on at the right time when the crop needs it, that seems to be the key. Early season magnesium is often very important. It helps with late season ripeness. It helps your leaves be nice and green and big, which basically tells you that your photosynthesis process is working really well. Calcium helps obviously with your overall cell structure, your cell walls, and helps with the overall health of your plant and your fruit. And potassium is the magical drug of bulking the fruit and making that sweet, sweet flavor without the added sugar. So potassium is definitely your friend late season for sure. So we take a very, precise and more accurate approach. We do think like basically like you're building or baking a cake. So you don't put the icing on until the cake is actually made and cooled. And the way we think of icing is the way we think of foliar fertility. So if you get a nice, good ground approach, starting with your soil, starting with a really good soil fertility plan, whether that be using granular fertilizer or other implements. And then from there, looking for like nice windows of opportunity to put the icing on the cake. So if we're looking at those great opportunities to getting boron on at the right time, because we know boron is very good for pollination and pollen tube development. So this is where sap samples come into play, is we try and take the guesswork out of the equation as much as possible. So we know that the soil test is a good way to see what nutrients are around for the plant to uptake. And we all know though that like everything basically revolves around weather. We're all at the mercy of our weather. So if we start out with a cold spring, we might have a lovely bank of nutrients in our soil. That might be a right opportunity to apply something else so that we know that our plants are getting are able to uptake a nutrient, say foliar, when they're not able to get it from the soil in cold spring. We look at nutrient levels, we look at the base saturations, and a lot of people overlook base saturations, but having just a big full bucket full of a bunch of nutrients isn't really how we look at nutrient plans anymore. We look at ratios and we look at what is actually available to the plant and what could be like pushing on one nutrient and while allowing another one in. We look at the organic matter and its impact. We know that from our organic matter, we likely, in a high organic matter situation, we likely don't need as much nitrogen. We know that there's going to be quite a bit of release of nitrogen throughout the season if we have a higher than 3% organic matter. And of course, we look at pH. I don't know how many times people have asked me like that they need fertilizer recommendations, and then I look at their soil and I say, I don't think you want to put fertilizer on with a pH this low. You're literally throwing money away if you're not adjusting your pH so that the plant can actually access fertilizer. So you may have seen these graphs before, but basically you're just, the big proof there is you want to have your soil at a pH where it's very accessible, where all those nutrients are the most accessible to you. And we do tend to see low iron this time of year, but if you have a strongly acidic soil, the only thing that's really available to you is iron. So on the whole efficiency scheme, you really want to have a pH of like between 6.5 and 7.5, or in that middle area. And then you're going to have more of the available nutrients in the soil actually available to that plant. So if you're just talking about tissue samples versus petiole or pediole samples, tissue samples for us are more like report cards. So at the very beginning of the season, you've set your fertility plan, you've got your base or your cake baked. You've put maybe granular fertilizer on, maybe you've put chicken manure or whatever on your vineyard. And then you've possibly put on some foliar, who knows? So you have 2 opportunities to take those PDL samples. And it basically gives you a picture, like, okay, so how am I doing? The beauty later on, when you look at plant sap is looking at the dissolved nutrients in the plant at that time. It's basically like a blood test. So you can see what the plant has actually got into the inside and is able to use. You can take a sap sample at any moment of the season. There's definitely key times that we do check-ins. But basically, if you see something in your vineyard and you want to know what's going on, you can take a sap sample, and your numbers or your targets aren't just based on one moment in time. For your PDL targets, those are based on specific timings. I'm not sure if that is clear or not, but hopefully you'll let me know in the chat. So this is just an example of a strawberry leaf sap. It's only like half of one. So there's a couple things that we really focus on. We don't just take one leaf. So for instance, with your PDL samples, they recommend, I think it's like the 5th PDL that you use on this year's growth. Where with sap sampling, we take a new leaf and we take an old leaf. Your new leaf is the first or like the most recent fully formed leaf. And then an old leaf is basically like a leaf, this year's first leaf or something along that lines, but it's further down the stem. And then you use your new leaf and your old leaf levels to tell you if you're going to come up against any issues. So knowing if a nutrient travels well in the plant. So if I have a nutrient such as potassium that travels pretty good throughout the plant, I know that it can steal nutrients from an old leaf and send it up to a new leaf. When I start seeing deficiencies, then I'm actually going to see it in the plant. Like I'll walk through the vineyard and I'll see signs, whether it be like pink on the outside of the leaf showing me a potassium deficiency, or maybe it's an older leaf that's starting to turn yellow, which might be a sign of nitrogen deficiency. But with sap samples, we can often predict a deficiency before we see it. So if you look down at the calcium doesn't move very well in the plant. So our old leaves had lots of calcium in it. These are the dark leaves at the base of the calcium. And our new leaves are low. So in this sap sample, if it's in the middle column, that's your target range. That's where you want to be. If you're on the left-hand side, you're getting low, you're getting deficient. So that plant might not be showing calcium deficiency, but we're going to see one pretty soon. So that's an indication that maybe we could apply a foliar calcium. Mel, if you want to switch up I'm monotone, so if you want to break in at any point, you can.
Oh, sounds good. So yeah, I can talk here a little bit about Nova Crop. So Nova Crop, this is where we send all our sap analysis to. So once we get we collect the leaves, we have to make sure they're dry, we stack them, we put them into bags, and then we do them up and we ship them right away over to the Netherlands. So this is where Nova Crop Control is located. So they are the ones who are doing the sap analysis and are giving us the reports. So Yeah, and I think they're the only ones, am I right, Allison, around that are doing it right now for SAP analysis?
Yes, there has been talk of a possible Canadian lab that they may put in place. But it hasn't really, I guess, evolved anything quite yet. The key for SAP samples is they do have to be all taken before 9 a.m. in the morning, because you need to have a certain level of turgid pressure on your leaf to get a consistent result. So if you see us crawling through Vineyard at 7 in the morning, it's usually because we're trying to get our leaves all taken before 9 a.m. They're kept cool and shipped pretty much right away. We do them over a series of 2 to 3 days, and they're kept in the fridge and ship them all at once. Basically, FedEx charges, and as long as they don't get caught in customs for whatever reason, which has happened, it's been good. This year has been excellent. And basically, the main thing that gets messed up if they are caught in customs for a long period of time is you cannot rely on the nitrogen levels, because your on and skyrockets if it's sitting there for an extended period of time. This is just basically a break to say, like, the quality of your plants and the quality of your fruit basically relies on nutrition. And I think some people will often forget, like, in order to keep a healthy body, we have to obviously feed it with really good nutrients. And the same is true for our plants. So in order to end with a healthy berry that's made it through the season, that gets the result that you want, you have to feed it the correct and proper nutrition. Oops, sorry. We can't do it with just sap alone. That's one key thing. We're not trying to take anything away from the importance of soil and PDO samples, and even fruit samples at the end. We don't do a lot of fruit analysis for our clients on the grape side of things. I think that's probably more up to your wineries at this point. And hopefully you get feedback from your wineries telling you what, like your sugars and all, and the quality of your fruit. But you have to take basically the whole package tells you the whole story. SAP is just another tool that we have found very helpful.
And especially right now with
We'll try and be quick.
Wool and crop protectants, that it is really important to be following the 5 R's, so you are applying the right nutrient at the right time and at the right rates.
These are basically the key growth stages that we look at when people are trying to determine, if I'm going to try sap sampling, when is the best time to try it. And oftentimes they start off like with a little bit at a time. And I would say the earlier you can start, if you're going to pick like one time to do a sap sample, I'd probably try and start early. Try and catch any nutrient deficiencies early. So if you start at that full bloom stage, you're more apt to be able to fix some things before you're at like bunch closure. I coach soccer too, so this is pretty cool. Basically having a strategic plan for your vineyard. So if you have a couple seasons under your belt, you may at least be able to recognize what you often struggle with. But having your tricks up your sleeve and ready before the season is often a great plan of attack. And I know Steve is also a really great resource for us to talk about, because he often will tell you in January, like what his plan is if he gets this and what he plans on doing if this happens. Having those plans doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have to act on them, but having that plan in place, it really makes your season a lot less stressful, because at least you have an attack plan if something happens. Saying my internet connection is unstable. Here's just a little snapshot of another sap sample, basically just showing you all the different nutrients in the target. And we're kind of running out of time, but if there's any questions, we're more than happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Alison, for your nice presentation. No, as well. It's nice to see all the data and how you're showing with facts and what you can provide to the growers. So if somebody has a question, we have time for at least 1 or 2 questions. So I invite you to write your questions in the Q&A feature. So while we are waiting, if somebody writes something, I have one question. So you were talking about soil sampling for fertility recommendations. So when are you usually taking the soil sampling, and why you're recommending at that time?
So usually we're taking soil samples. Typically in the fall is kind of the timing that we have that we can go out and we can get them done. And then in the winter time, we're kind of looking at those samples and talking to the grower to see what they're looking to do, seeing kind of what their goals are, what nutrients are low, and even varieties too, what they're growing in that location. And then that way we're able to build a program for you on the granular side to meet your needs.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mel, for your explanation and let us know how you work and the importance to be taking a soil sample. And thank you very much as well to Alison. It was a very nice presentation.
Can I ask a question about the preseason, the winter meetings, Francisco?
Absolutely.
So I know Alison and Mel, and I know we've been through this, but I think it's a really great thing you guys do. All that data that the growers can give you, and put together that preseason meeting. And I know you guys have a file on our vineyard over a few years, right? And the more you can build that relationship, and when we're sitting down around the table and building that program for the next year, we're often looking at the trends. And so like, what's the best, like how many years and how many soil samples and everything would it be great for a grower to kind of give you if you wanted to set up a preseason, like a winter preseason meeting to go over some fertility plans or strategies for disease prevention?
Usually the more information, the better. But what we have been finding is after, say, I know we've had a few wonky years with hurricanes and frost and stuff. But if you have even at least 3 years of data, then you really tend to try and you start seeing trends for sure. And it's really neat how there's different things that pop up. For like just one real simple example was we had, I think there were like 4 or 5 years of apple sap sample data that we had. And after a stressful event or after a hurricane, in many instances, the spike in sodium in our sap samples was just across the board the same. So we're like, there's definitely trends that will pick up with your individual vineyard, which is awesome, because then we can change the everything from granular to timing of applications. And then we also have like what we see with all of our growers, just different trends from weather patterns that we tend to be building. But 3 years typically is helpful, getting to know the vineyard for sure.
That's great. And the other comment, I have a question for you is, as we're looking into the season here, kind of mid-season, where we're thinking about fruit set and starting to think about botrytis sprays and everything, is there products we should be concerned about this year? Is there something? I mean, I know it's great to order ahead of time and everything, but is there stuff you're seeing that we really should be on top of coming into this mid to late season spray program?
If you're on top of your PHIs and REIs, that's key. And if you have a few different ideas of what's, so knowing that if you have one botrytis spray that you use all the time, or if you have, just one fungicide in general that you use all the time, don't be alarmed if we are sold out. And we have awesome guides at our fingertips, like perennias, omafras, that there's multiple options available. So just be smart with your groups and be willing to change. So if one thing's not available, this is the year that you might have to try something new.
Yeah, perfect. No, thanks very much. That's great. And I don't see any other questions, Francisco.
Yeah, no more questions. So thank you very much, Alison and Mel, for your nice presentation and to answer the questions. So just to continue with our session, Alison, if you could stop sharing the screen, it would be great. Now, as many sessions or as a classical of the best practices event, I'm glad to invite Jeff Franklin to be present. So Jeff, the screen is all yours.
Well, thank you very much, Francisco. Thanks everybody for inviting me back. Yes, we've been doing this now. This is our third year. I'm actually developing quite a file of these presentations, and I can look back at them and see where we were at this time of year in previous years. So it's kind of helpful. Okay, so does that all look good? Am I up and running?
It looks perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so let's dive right into this. Looking at just at average temperatures, I show this plot every time. The black dots are, of course, daily average temperatures from 1st of January up till yesterday. The gray line is the trend line. It's a 10-year trend line. It's what we would anticipate, what we expect to have on a daily basis in terms of temperatures. And so, yeah, dots above the gray line mean we're above average, and dots below mean we're below average. So again, we talk about this every time. We started off below average early in the season, but we've had, I think, quite consistently since middle of March, with a few exceptions, above average temperatures. And this kind of shows in terms of development. But one thing that's happened just recently, we've actually moved into and I've never got to talk about this before, so I'm quite excited. We've actually got to move into a period of seasonal temperatures. So June, for the most part, has just been seasonal, not a lot of fluctuations. But one thing that's interesting about this graph, and I like to point this out, if you look at the dotted line, so the span of the data that we see in the winter, it's huge. The day-to-day, the changes day-to-day in temperature are dramatic. And we know, and this is a known trend in meteorology, especially for places, coastal regions, is that winter weather is quite dynamic, changes a lot day to day, but then we eventually stabilize into a more continental type of a climate, which is what we do later in the year. And you can see currently our temperatures, the day-to-day fluctuation is probably plus or minus 4 degrees, whereas in the winter, it was probably 3 times that. And that's not just, we're in a period of very stable weather right now, and we also did just come through a winter that wasn't very stable, with huge temperature swings and cycles that were consistent through the whole time. But as I point out there, we've gone through a fairly sustained period of seasonal temperatures. So I'm going to drill down on this a little farther and just look at the hourly temperatures that we've recorded at the Kempful Research Station. So the black line is literally just the plot of the hourly temperatures that we record at the Kempful Research Station just for the month of June. And the dotted red line and the dotted blue lines are the what we call the normal highs and the normal lows. So what we would expect for a high and a low temperature. And those, the standard for that comes from Environment Canada, and I believe they're based on 25-year averages. So there's a few things interesting about this plot. So early in June, we were still, you see there's a black dotted line down here. I'll point this out. Down in here, this is the frost line, and we shouldn't be talking about this at all in June, but this year we were very close to that. So once we get down to 4 degrees, certainly at the Kempfel site, we know if we have 4 degrees and very still air, that can be patchy frost in low-lying areas. Now, we didn't see that on site in Kempfel, and I haven't talked to anybody who saw that, but that was still in play in early June, and thankfully that's in our rearview mirror. But what's interesting about this plot is that most of the hourly observations are sandwiched nicely between these normal high temperatures and normal low temperatures, and that's just another way of saying that we're experiencing, for the most part, seasonal temperatures. Although we do have some areas in here where we had a sustained period of daily highs that were higher than average, and a few times in the month when we were below average. For the most part, most of our weather has been where we would expect it in that zone. And of course, what came along, and this is how we measured at the research station in terms of timing. So flowering for us started around June 16th and continued on. In fact, I looked at a few clusters today, our Vidal, which would be one of our latest flowering varieties. And they were just about, maybe they had lost 80% of the caps, still had a few caps still in place. So that's quite a long span of time. And we have some very aggressive varieties or very early varieties like Marquette, which started in mid-June, and we've continued on with its flowering right through till July, till today. And so that can be challenging if you're trying to optimize sprays for botrytis. You're trying to get in there, you get your pre-bloom spray on. There's quite a long reference period there, 3 weeks of this flowering period to try to adjust that and get that on. So looking at this, although I call it stable, there is some evidence here. We look at the hourly temperatures of some fluctuation, some cycling, but really most of this can be explained by looking at precipitation. So this is the same plot I just showed you before, but now I've added the green vertical bars are precipitation events. And of course, the higher they are, the bigger the precipitation event was. So there's a couple, I think if you found June to be a challenging month horticulturally, I think this is part of the reason why, certainly in grape. So if you count the number of green dots along the axis there's 13 in the month of June. So 13 out of 30 days, we saw some accumulation of rain, although some of those weren't very big, but enough that it would interfere with spray activities and also create the conditions for propagation of mildew. To make it even a bit more challenging, for the events that we've seen in this time span were sufficient to remove any contact products that you had on your leaves. Anything that's non-systemic could have been washed off. So some of those bigger rain events are fairly close together, so you would have probably had to reapply if you wanted to keep covered up. And not just that, there was also an extended period of time in here where we just had showery, rainy weather that stretched over a week. Very challenging for disease, and you can almost take it to the bank that disease is progressing during those times. And so most growers are just struggling trying to get in there in the dry periods and keep covered up. So definitely challenging in terms of precipitation for the month of June. So just looking at temperatures in a table, so going from March on till June, we've been above the 10-year average for every month since March, and well above the average for some of those months. Like the month of March was 2 degrees above average. That's a huge deviation. June, only 1/10 of a degree. So you would say that June was more or less seasonal, and I think the previous plots that I shown kind of bear that out. There was nothing of that dramatic about any of the temperatures that we saw in June. So this leads us on looking at growing degree days. Growing degree days for 2022, the red line here. And that's in contrast to the dotted black line, which is the 10-year trend. So we've been trending above that 10-year mean for since the middle of May. That's good. Sometimes we were ahead of the 2021 season, which is a very advanced season. But right now we're riding a little bit behind it, but we are in line with 2020 and 2017. And the good news there, the take-home point is that those were very good grape growing years, and we're on that trajectory. And I think there's some indication that we're going to at least stay there for the balance of the season. And the other good news is if you look at the two green lines that are below the trend line, 2019 and 2018, well, we're nowhere close to those. And those were tough years for grape growing. We're on the right side of the trend line and in line with the years that were good seasons. So looking at total rainfall, and again, this is total rainfall and rainfall equivalent. I like to show this plot, and there is a time of the year when this plot is no longer that useful, but I don't think we've gotten there yet. I mean, we saw a huge contribution of precipitation in the month of February, and although, you know, the precipitation that we're concerned with now is of course what's happened in the last couple of weeks, but I still see impacts certainly in reservoirs and also in the soil, that there is a lot of moisture in the soil. We haven't lost that. There's great moisture in the soil for planting. This has been a great year if you're trying to establish new blocks or establish anything. There's been good moisture around, so you should get effective germination for seeds and definitely good uptake by new plants. So just looking at the month of June for rain, I mean, it doesn't get any more average than this. We had 95 millimeters of rain in the month of June in Kentville, and that's exactly the average. So we were a bit behind the average in May. We're right at the average in June, but we definitely were running well above average in the months before that. But June is a highly variable month for precipitation. If you look back, I was looking back today over 50 years of data. I mean, it's ranged from Junes where we had 5 millimeters of rain to Junes where we've had well over 200 millimeters of rain. And you can see just in the 10 years on this plot, we've had anywhere from 15 millimeters to 171 millimeters. That's a lot of variability. So when we talk about an average, that average is made up of some very dramatic deviations from year to year. Precipitation across the province for the month of June. We're actually, I think, kind of fortunate here in the valley that we ran very close to average precipitation, where some other spots, Halifax, Sydney, well above average, where they, you know, that certainly Halifax, not a big horticultural region, but that's a lot of rain, and that would have definitely, had we had those levels of rain in the valley, they would have been difficult to work with, more difficult than we already saw. So we're in a bit of a good spot here. We've seen this develop in other years where we don't get the extreme precipitation that stays on the coast, and we're going to hope that it continues on this year. So soil temperatures, again, the 2022 data is the red line, and very much like the growing degree days. You know, since early in the season, we've been above the trend line. The trend line is the black line. We've stayed there. We dipped below it a little bit. So you can see one spot here. I'll try to point it out as best I can. There's a spot right in here where the soil temperatures dip down below the trend line. And that was largely caused by that week that I pointed out earlier, that we almost had a solid week with rain every single day. And this time of year, what drives soil temperatures is solar radiation. So it's not so much that the rain itself, rain also does cool off the soil, but the lack of solar radiation in extended cloudy periods, that's what brings the temperatures down in the soil. And so, but overall, we're well ahead. So, you know, people began applying their granular fertilizers, their ground-based fertilizers in middle of May, or some not till June. But with the soil temperatures at that level, good activity in the roots and good uptake. And so I suspect that people were rewarded, people that make ground-based fertilizer applications have gotten good uptake, and those things should be incorporated well. Just looking at phenology. So I was also fortunate, I got to today visit probably half a dozen vineyards here in Kings County, and to see whether or not these pictures that I have in the slide are from the Kentville Research Station, just for varieties that we have. But overall, I see similar things in other vineyards. So our Lackady, Blanc, and Marquette would be the first cluster on the left is Lackady Blanc. It's just gotten outside of the flower period. Our Marquette, which would be our most advanced variety, is well beyond on the flowering period. And our Vidal, which is the one on the right, I probably had about 20% of its caps still in place, and it's only at the end of flowering. So that gives us a kind of a range of EL 25 to 29. Unfortunately, I didn't give this talk on this date last year, so I don't know exactly where we were last year at this time. I suspect we were a little bit behind where we were last year at this time, but very close to the 2020 phenology for this time of year. But on the other side of that, just ignoring not the clusters, but actually looking at the vines themselves, one thing when you get good levels of heat and lots of moisture, more moisture than the plant needs, is that things become very vigorous. And so this is our Lac Blanc, the photo on the left, and our Marquette, the photo on the right. So in most cases, our Lac Blanc shoots were up to the top wire. And most of our Marquette shoots are above the top wire, so much so that we will have to start top edging next week to stay ahead of that. Certainly other varieties, and we observed other varieties today. There's a lot of vinifera in the valley that is approaching the third wire with a few shoots over the top. So hedging is not far away for most people. And to finish off, last major slide here. So we look at the long-term forecast for Environment and Climate Change Canada. They update this monthly. This is the one from the 30th of June. So if you remember from my last presentation, we were probably the only spot in Canada where there was some probability that we would have above average temperatures for the rest of the growing season. So that hasn't changed a lot, except the probability of that happening. So the probability of us having above average temperatures has actually increased. And now many other regions of Canada are included in that. And so that looks like a good growing season. People have been talking, meteorologists have been talking for some time. Atlantic Canada was going to be the warm region of Canada this year. And from this prediction, that certainly follows up on that. And I think so far what we've seen since the middle of May, that's been true for us. We're definitely having a good growing season. And just like to briefly show our contributors and collaborators here. And that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Jeff, for the nice presentation and show the numbers and all the average. So I know you already said it's quite easy, but I don't think it harms to repeat it. How was the precipitation through June this year, similar to the average?
So we were 95 millimeters in June, and that is exactly on the 10-year average. It's a little bit ahead of the 25-year average, and we may be seeing a little bit of a trend in the month of June, a very slight trend to higher precipitation levels in that month. June is a shoulder season month. It's where we end our spring weather pattern and we move into our summer pattern, which is a drier pattern. June's always that shoulder season, is why we have so much rain, so much variability. But it does seem, and I know for us, we got a lot of that precipitation came in the form of storms. And so we are maybe seeing some stormy weather in June, which is driving those precipitation values up a little bit. But in terms of 10-year average, we were right on it, 95 millimeters.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jeff, to summarize and explain about the precipitation. It's a topic always quite hot here because everybody thinks we have low precipitation, but no, it's fine. Thank you very much.
And I got to say, Jeff, those graphs are just getting better and better. We're just going to have to dedicate a whole best practice session to weather and weather graphs sometime and forget about Francisco and his talk altogether. I'll let you know.
You just give me that call and I'll be ready.
No comment.
So coming up next, Francisco is going to give us a little update on Vineyard activities. And that'll kind of lead into when Danny and I get to talk about what's going on in our vineyards. So go ahead, Francisco.
Absolutely. I will be being efficient with my presentation. So good evening, everyone. Today I will be talking about a little bit of the vineyard activities, just to give the introduction to the discussion of Danny and Steve. So today, I will be talking about the Bloom 2022, about something like already discussed at the beginning, tissue sampling, briefly about off-calf to give you an introduction of what is that. We'll continue with the scouting the vineyard. It's something all the time to have in mind, and it's something that I repeat all the time. And activities, we'll mention two especially, tucking and deleafing, and we'll finish with the growers discussion. So, in terms of bloom 2022 highlights, bloom started approximately on June 21. Okay, when I'm saying approximately and giving these dates, I'm taking bloom itself, like when we reach like the 50% of bloom. And in 2021, it was approximately on June 20, and on 2020 was approximately on June 24. And with this, I'm saying like the earliest varieties, as already mentioned, Jeff, like Marquette, Frontenac, or Baco Noir. These are the first one. This is the earliest hybrid, and it might vary depending on location. So keep in mind that these numbers are coming from specific areas here in the valley. So weather conditions have been favorable for plant growth with an important soil moisture. Already Jeff mentioned that. The good temperature accumulation and moisture for grapevines. So that's why we have been observing huge growth and preparing for hedging. Tagging is work in progress, and we are already planning the leafing. So weeds are still growing fast. Like bloom, veraison may start similar to last year, but careful, important to keep an eye in the weather updates. So I would like to say thank you to Jeff for all the information that he's providing weekly, and we can update the grape blog. So keep an eye on there so we can see if bloom it will arrive or not, similar as last year. So tissue sampling, already mentioned by Alison and Mel at the beginning, we have two timings, which are bloom and veraison. So we need some consideration. So when we are taking a tissue sampling, we have to be consistent with phenology. So seeing the bloom and veraison as the proper times. We have to be sampling the same areas. And with that, I mean the same sections of the vineyard all the time. Okay, so try to choose a couple of rows and keep in mind to collect every year from the same areas. Keep separate samples from varieties, rootstocks, and specific areas. So if you have Chardonnay in two different rootstocks, please try to collect the samples from both different rootstocks. Or if you have a low area and a higher area, please keep separate. And this is a question, is blades or petioles? Well, ideally both, and it depends on the nutrients. So for some nutrients, petioles will be more precise, and for blades, others. So it depends. However, petioles are easy to handle and to collect in big quantities. Okay, so that's why we proceed always with petioles. If you can do both, great. Otherwise, try to choose, and petioles it has a good information. Why it's important? Because it gives you how are working or the amount of specific nutrients in the plant. They're super important for a good fruit development, just to grow the healthy berries, and also facilitate ripening, like already Alison mentioned, like the case of potassium. So keep in mind that you need to have like a sample, entire sample, and you have to separate as a blade and a petiole. So keep in mind that this will be separate and collected in different bags. So what to do? Well, it's to evaluate vineyard necessities and apply according to these values. So where I can find information? Well, in the grape production guide provides information. So as you can see right now, we have a QR code for the grape production guide. So if you want to use your smartphone, you can take a photo or with a photo, and you will be redirected to the guide. In the guide, it's possible to find more literature as well, not only what we wrote there. So if you go to the section of references, you will see many different fact sheets or publications where you can read even more and get like tables like this. So I mentioned at the beginning the OFCAF, which is the On-Farm Climate Action Fund. This is an initiative to help farmers farmers sequester carbon and reduce greenhouse gases emissions by adopting beneficial management practices around nitrogen management and cover cropping. So again, you have here in another QR code, so you can scan with your smartphone to take a look. Otherwise, you can go to the Great blog, and there you will see a publication with information of OFCAP. So what it covers, just to give you some examples, it can cover soil and tissue analysis cost, or cost of practices that improve fertilizer placement and nitrogen use efficiency. So take a look there, it's quite interesting. So where to apply? Well, please check the OFCAF website or scan the QR code, and there you will find all the information and to ask to the correct people to get more info about it. So scouting the vineyard. So this is quite repetitive. I have been publishing on the Great blog the last couple of weeks, and we mentioned in the last presentation as well. So how? Well, we have to identify growth stage, variety, and area. So varieties have different disease susceptibility. So we have to identify which areas of the vineyard and which symptoms. So important to track date and weather conditions. Already, Jeff, it's providing a lot of data, so that is something that it can work. Check the damage on the vine, a description of the damage, and do it 1 to 2 times per week minimum, but ideally 3 times, and even better, 4 times. So where you can get information about how they look, the diseases and the damage, well, the Great Production Guide has very nice photos and information where you can find more about it. So where to look? Well, priority on the most susceptible varieties. And usually, if you have a vinifera variety, please take a look to the vinifera. Areas with less airflow and wet spots, because there you will have more humidity, and with the warm conditions will appear more the fungi. And attention to wind directions and depressions through the vineyard, because depending where is the wind and where you have the focus or the sink of disease, it will spread. So keep notes of the areas with your observations and check different parts of the vine, like the leaves on the top and behind. Also, I like to mention all the time, this is a picture coming from this week, keep in mind that downy mildew will look like an oil spot, and with the current conditions, they are ideally for downy mildew development. So keep an eye on that. In the activities, well, tucking, well, variety priority, it will be the fastest growth and the ones with tendency to lay down. So for example, if you have Frontenac that has a tendency to lay down, well, start from there. So which are the advantage? Well, facilitate activities like improve spray applications, it's a better canopy aeration, and improve the fruit exposure. Another activity coming soon, quite soon, even some people is already starting, is de-leafing. And this is, again, variety priority. So it depends on how dense is the canopy, which is the purpose of the vineyard. Depending on which wine, it will be necessary to start earlier or later. So what we have to consider, removing like 40 to 100% of leaves. And before moving forward, and depending on which strategy you want to do, and you don't have experience in your area, previous evaluations are recommended before proceeding with the whole vineyard. Earlier in the season will be beneficial producing photoprotective flavonoids. So what means that? If we start early in the season, like a pea size, just to mention something, the grapes will create that protection, so we'll avoid to have a burn berry through the season, through August. So when to be done? Well, it can be early between bloom and fruit set, or traditionally between fruit set and veraison. So the question is, do we have any local trials about it? Well, yes, we have a couple in L'Acadie and Pinot Noir. And they were done before bloom and after fruit set. And it was believed between the 50 to 70% of leaf in only the morning side or the east side. So which are the results? Well, in L'Acadie, both leaf thinning increased the amount of polyphenols because the grapes were more exposed to the sun. Berries were smaller with leaf thinning, and we didn't have any difference at yield, okay? While in Pinot Noir, unfortunately, the vineyard crew in this section passed through all the treatments, so we were unable to see any results. However, this continued this season, and we'll be able to have more information to provide. So this is how it would look a vineyard before the de-leafing, early, before a bloom, and this is how it would look after bloom. So again, as the last time, I would like to invite you to check the Grape blog if you haven't done. Each QR will send you to the blog. One is to the blog and other is to the sign up to the blog. And there you will find a lot of information coming from Jeff, from some grape growers, from Perennia, like the OFCAF and others. So with this, I'm summing up a little bit our growers discussion, which will be today with Steve Els, the owner of Els La Farm, but I'm very glad to have at this time Danielle Graham, the vineyard manager of Benjamin Ridge. So Steve and Danielle, thank you very much. It's nice to see you both here. And so sorry, Steve, but I will give the word to Danielle at this time. So Danielle, just to warm up, and because we already talked about it, how was bloom in your area?
Fairly successful. There's still some areas that are not fully finished with caps falling off. There's a lot of variability because of having so many different cultivars and variations for that start, closure, mid, and end time. So I'm not fully done everywhere, but it has been quite successful. I don't see any shatter so far in early onset hybrid varieties. And vinifera is looking quite positive right now as we move just coming out into kind of shot berries at the beginning stages after bloom.
Okay, perfect. And in your case, Steve, how's going?
Yeah, it looks good at this point. Hybrids are pretty much done. Just a couple of the later hybrids, a little bit left there, like Muscat and stuff. But Frontenac, Geisenheim, Lackady, they're all set and ready to go. Looks like Danielle, looks like a really good set so far in the hybrids. Chardonnay with us is pretty much completely done. It's probably 90% done. Pinot is probably about 50% through, and the later ones, Cab and Riesling, are kind of just coming in there. I think everything will probably be done by the end of next week. So and so far it's all looking pretty good, like a good set. So
okay, so Steve, because I'm curious about all the practices in different vineyards, are you taking tissue sample for nutrient management purposes?
yeah, so we take tissue samples and sap samples at bloom. We do spring soil sampling, so we start putting that all together, and I mean we do a lot together with Adelson and Mel, and kind of keep an eye on our activities, bring all that information together and see how we're doing. So yeah, we've already done the first round of petiole samples and sap samples.
In your case, Danielle, are you using the same strategy?
Yes, I'm about 80% through right now. I'm going to be doing both, and I'm doing them a little bit more intricate this year, so by block. So quite a lot that I'll be doing, and I ran soil samples in the fall.
Okay, perfect. We received a question in the chat. Please, if somebody wants to write any question, I would like to invite you to write them, and please use the feature Q&A. So the question is, does the soil testing lab in Truro use the nutrient guide when they make their nutrient recommendations? They ask the type of crop. To be honest, Jerome, I don't think a nutrient guide, I'm not very sure how they proceed at the lab. I think they have their own internal information, how they are providing, and they provide very general recommendations.
We don't go by the recommendations at all. We just take the data from those soil tests, and then like would consult with someone like Francisco or Mel and Allison, or I mean there's other, not to give all the highlight to Truro Agrimart, but I mean, Cavendish and Scotian Gold have people that can look at those too. So yeah, we do some of it ourselves, but yeah, we don't. I think the guides from the lab in Truro are too general. They're not fine-tuned enough for our purposes.
Yeah, they're site specific, and in some cases too, some of the samples you can be getting to for the cropping levels aren't necessarily always designed for your region either.
Yeah, I think it's in that. And depending on each area, and already Mel and Alison mentioned that, they will need different, or they will have different requirements. So it's always to see it more like in a critical way. It depends also the plant health condition. So it exists a couple of factors. So just to finish with the tissue sample and the nutrient management part, at this stage, Danny, are you applying something to the plants, or you just let them?
In terms of nutrition?
Yes.
I ran so far, so I'm going to wait to have the results back come on my PDLs and my SAMP samples. I've ran like early iron. I've ran early calcium to improve set, zinc, boron, as well as a little bit of magnesium condition on the site, the soil, and other nutritions at work. So that's what I've run so far. And then I've run granular fertilizer earlier in the season as well. But I'm going to wait till I have a little bit more acute measurements to see how I progress with the rest of the season, to see what everything looks like. Perfect.
And how are you doing it, Steve? Similar to that, or in a different way?
Pretty much similar. We go on at with an early, really low little super small dusting of fertilizer in the vineyard, kind of at bud break. Then we would wait like about 4 to 5 weeks and do another follow-up, really kind of a similar dusting of it, just really low rates, because we don't want it just to percolate through the soil. We just want to give it and let the plants take up that little tiny bit. Being really careful. And that all comes from those winter meetings and looking at last year's production and the soil tests and everything. So we set that up. And then pretty much the foliar applications would just be some early iron, a little bit of zinc. We always tend to do an extra application of magnesium on Frontenac varieties. Those Minnesota varieties seem to need a little extra magnesium for some reason. And then a couple applications of boron coming up to set. So that's where we're at now. Now we're going to switch more to calcium and zinc away from boron and iron.
Perfect. And it's nice to hear that it's a similar strategy. You are waiting for the tissue samples before taking a strategy, instead of like use a machine gun of different nutrients and see what's going on. So I will pass to something that is going super fast, and I can imagine for you it's everywhere. It's tacking and deleafing. So Steve, how are you dealing with that? How's going everything in that, and when are you expecting to start deleafing?
So we're tucking like crazy right now. And we tried to do mostly just wire moving. We try to stay away from touching the vines very much. It's just too slow for us. So second wires, I think second wire's done on everything now. We started dropping third wire, the top wire down on Frontenac, some of the early varieties, Frontenac and Lackady today. So that'll go back up early next week. I think everything has reached top wire now in the vineyard. So yeah, it's definitely time for tucking. A couple of the varieties, I know one block of Pinot, one block of Chardonnay, we're going through and actually doing that kind of straighten up tuck and putting clips in on the middle wire now, just to try to, it's kind of our premium block. So we take a little extra care with that one. So yeah, tucking is all hands on deck. Many hands make light work. So everyone is tucking and moving wires right now at our place. And as far as deleafing goes, I would expect we'll start next week with that. So we do the hybrid varieties like Frontenac and Geisenheim and Lackady with the machine deleafer. Right now, those are all set, but the clusters are kind of sticking out. So with the machine, we want them to be hanging down like that. So we just need a little bit more weight for them and they'll hang down. And I would expect middle of next week to the end of next week, you'll see us in the vineyard deleafing.
Okay, so it's coming quite fast and starting in a mechanical way, not manually.
Yeah, so we would wait a little longer. We'll do those ones first, but I mean, it's not too longer. Once we get that tucking done, then we would start going through the vinifera varieties by hand. So we definitely want to get in as early as we can. Like I like to get in somewhere between set and pea size.
Perfect. And Danny, how's it going in your side? How's tucking? How's that
Tucking.
activity?
Lots of it across every site, restructuring as well where the vineyard needs it. We have lots of areas where the wires are actually fixed in place, so I don't have the option of lifting and raising wire. I know, Steve. So that'll change, but that's a long-term trajectory change. The places where we can move wires, we are, which is great. So everything's up almost to the third wire where there's viability, which is wonderful. Going to be on the same trajectory as Steve. Have a machine de-leafer. We'll wait for them to weigh down, so not to promote damage. On hybrids, and we'll probably run an east side de-leaf anywhere from 80 to 100 contingent on varietal and hybrids, and then vinifera probably looking at east-west with a little bit further development between pea size and a little bit bigger.
Okay. And then you said that you're using a mechanical de-leafer. You have a de-leafer with rollers, it's pulling air. Which type of de-leafer?
That's a Binger de-leafer. So using air, but also sucking the leaves away. And I got the sickle bar attachment this year, Steve. I haven't used it yet, but I if you had success with it, I'm looking forward to see. Just because I noticed even if you get in there a little bit later, you have to be okay with a little bit of damage with the mechanical de-leafer. I've noticed here in Nova Scotia.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we use the same one, the
Yeah.
Binger, and the sickle bar is nice because you don't have to go through and hedge first. Right? It just takes those
Exactly.
laterals off, so you don't pull the whole shoot out into the. If it grabs the lateral, it doesn't pull the whole shoot out into the machine, right? So it prevents a little bit of damage.
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect. It's nice to hear that the strategies and combining everything. It has to be mechanical. We have some sort of labor and it's quite intense and everything growing super fast. So this is something that we like to discuss all the time, Danny. And sadly enough, we don't have the person who enjoys more, Marcel Kolf, about spraying. So Steve, because I know you like this as well, how is your spraying program? How looks everything in your vineyard, and a little bit of your observations of the season until now?
Good. Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of been, like Jeff pointed out, it's kind of been a typical Nova Scotia season so far with some rain events here and there, and it's always a challenge. So we scouted pretty hard after the big rain, and we've got a few little spots of downy, but like nothing to be concerned with, I don't think at this point, right? But we know it's out there, and we know we had absolutely perfect conditions for sporulation and for infections over the last couple of days. So I will probably, when we turn off the computers tonight, go jump in the spray tractor and get at it. But so far so good. So we're mixed, kind of a combined conventional organic program. We use conventional products, systemics around bloom, just because we feel that's the most important time of the year for us for protection. So we do use the extra efficacy products at that point. And they've done their job through those rain events and everything. It just saves us a couple passes through. But so far, so good. But we definitely were stretched a little thin right now on our spray time. We need to get back out. We'll be doing all the vinifera within the next 24, 48 hours. And then on the weekend, we'll probably try to get into the hybrids and do one more shot on the hybrids. I mean, with the vinifera, you have to keep them protected, but we find 2 sprays on the hybrids at bloom, and then you can kind of take a break from them, keep an eye on them with scouting, and then go back if you need to.
Perfect. It's good to know that strategy. How is in your case then?
So far, so good. There's the odd primary infection starting of downy that I've seen here and there, especially on some lower shoots. So I have to keep my eyes on that. I was actually out spraying today, and I'm going to be spraying tomorrow because of the weather events that we've had. The program that we have is largely organic, so it's kind of like chasing the dragon of spraying. It's quite a lot. So I definitely fall in line with Steve, definitely, because what I've noticed in Nova Scotia right around bloom is there tends to be an excessive amount of rain. I think I would probably be a little bit more favorable of running a systemic at that time, just to widen your windows, but to have that extra protection. But external to that, just a little bit of downy, the odd black rot spot I see here and there. Outside of that, pretty clean. But I have to, pretty on top of it now.
Yes, and especially if you are organic, you have to be on the top of all your sprays, no?
Yes.
Yeah, it's not many options. And I agree what you are saying about already Jeff said. Usually June, we have a good amount of precipitation. And sadly enough, it's always when we have bloom, just the right time to have a precipitation. So that's why sometimes we can have some berry abortion. So anyway, it's necessary to be scouting. I really like what Steve said as well. With the hybrids, you can be a little more loose, but all the time you have to be scouting. Otherwise, it can appear suddenly something and spread quite fast. And if you are in the case of an organic producer like Daniel, you have to be applying and keep an eye on the precipitation, especially that.
Yes.
So Steve, I think these are the main points of today's session. So I don't know if you would like to add something.
Yeah, well, it's one thing I didn't say with the spraying thing is we use the combination of hybrids and vinifera in the spray timings to bounce back and forth for re-entry periods. So always think about re-entry, especially with tucking and all that handwork, right? So a lot of products, I mean, they range anywhere from 4 hours to 72 hours. So some are even longer than that. So using that thing of your different blocks and spray a block, keeping in mind that you're going to want your vineyard people in there or yourself or whatever to continue tucking. So delay one block, spray one, figure it out. So you've always got somewhere you can be working and working safe like that. And then I think probably the other thing we should say is now that we're seeing set coming through on everything, it's a good time to check in with the winery. Wineries really appreciate good crop estimates. And this is one of those times when I know the next 2 or 3 weeks we'll be running through and doing some quick crop estimates. It's always good. And one thing to keep in mind, and maybe most growers appreciate this, but wineries don't like surprises. So if you go into your vineyard and you're seeing, you've got 25% better set than normal, it's really great to reach out because I mean, they're already planning tank space for harvest and everything. And then the other one is if you see 25% less set, the winery doesn't want that surprise either because they're going to want, to make up for that in another way. If, I watched some of the Tidal Bay events and everything this year, and they were talking about, they're already thinking of pruning about the Tidal Bay mix. You're from Grand Pré was talking about that and how important that is to them. So the winemakers and the wineries don't want surprises at harvest that they can make 25% less Tidal Bay because you had a crop failure or just a crop challenge you didn't tell them about. So it's a good time to reach out, keep that line of communication open and let them know how the vineyard's looking and how it's doing.
Danny, would you like to add something?
I'd be curious to see the numbers that come in because the year previous for hybrids, a lot of hybrids, or at least all of mine, threw quite a huge bumper crop. And I'm curious to see the variation from last year to this year in set and in yield potential as well.
Yeah, something very important to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think in our hybrids, ours is up a little bit, actually.
Is it?
Yeah, I think it's looking pretty good this year. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's important to consider if you have been applying some kind of fertilizer or you have been improving your nutrient management, the crops, they will be higher. So, and as Steve said, it's important to approach the wineries and provide that information. Daniel also said it's interesting to know how it changed every year. Mm-hmm. To keep in mind how are the conditions that it can influence as well, and we can be trying to repeat the following season a good yield. So I think with this, we sum up everything, Steve. So if you would like to close today's session.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank everyone for joining in. Thanks very much, Danny, for joining in. It's great.
Not a problem.
Catching up with you.
Yeah.
And thanks very much to Allison and Mel for presentation. That's really good information. And that whole thing of data, all that data, we can collect that data and use it to our advantages, and also all the data we can get from mine out of Jeff's graphs for the weather. So really enjoy all that. So thanks everyone. Thanks for all the people that tuned in to make this worthwhile doing for us all. And I hope everyone has a great growing July, and we'll be back in a few more weeks with another one of these. So thanks everyone. Talk to you later.